"You can't just do that," the HOA president shrieked, planting herself in front of my freshly repainted ranch, her eyes popping and fists balled tight. Her face flushed a furious red, her voice booming through the sleepy neighborhood like a fire alarm on overdrive. "This color violates Community Code Section 6.2. You didn't get approval." I leaned casually against my white picket fence, arms folded, watching her unravel with a quiet smirk. Behind her, a few neighbors peeked through their curtains, whispering like kids caught spying. I'd seen this clash coming, but the drama? Pure theater. She stomped up my driveway, heels clacking like a countdown to chaos, jabbing a finger at the creamy sandstone hue I'd picked for my home. "I'll make sure you're fined every day. Every single day until it's gone. I don't care if it takes an emergency board vote. I'll call a meeting myself." I let her rant, let her threaten, but I held a secret she couldn't fathom. I owned every inch of this HOA lot, including the ground beneath her polished shoes. When I finally dropped that bombshell with one cool sentence, "I am the HOA, Linda," her jaw hit the floor. Then a sharp crack split the air behind us. We whipped around toward the sound, and that's when it all exploded. "Hey everyone, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to grab a snack, because this story is going to take you on a wild ride." Let me take you back to how it all started. My name is Brandon Miller, 38 years old, part-time rancher, full-time software architect, living in the heart of Oklahoma, where folks still wave. And which city in the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you've had any run-ins with your HOA. We'll narrate your story on our channel. When they pass by and kids sell lemonade on weekends, I moved here for peace, to build a quiet life on a ranch I inherited from my late Uncle Tom. He was a war veteran and one of the kindest men I'd ever known. He passed away 2 years ago, leaving me his land and a dream. Build something you're proud of. I wasn't always into ranch life. I was born and raised in Chicago, where the only thing greener than a tree was someone's inexperience. But after a bad breakup, a corporate layoff, and a health scare, I packed up and moved here with my dog, Duke, to start fresh. The first few weeks were heaven. I mended fences, painted barns, and even adopted 3 goats from the local animal shelter. I found peace in the smell of morning dew and the sound of cicadas at night. I finally had time to think, to breathe, to live. But then came the HOA. It started with a letter in the mailbox, white envelope, gold embossed logo, Homeowners Association, notice you are in violation of HOA policy 4. 3 grass height, apparently. My front yard grass had grown 2 in past the acceptable limit. I laughed. Surely this was a joke. Then I got another letter. This time it was about the inappropriate use of earth-toned paint on my shed. It clashed with the community palette. Then came a fine and another, and then a visit from her, Linda Matthews. 60 years old, retired high school principal, turned HOA president, short, bob haircut, ironest, skirt suits, and a voice that could bend metal she didn't knock. She didn't call, she just showed up on my property one afternoon with a clipboard and a camera. "You'll need to remove this porch swing," she said, with a pinched smile. "It's not listed in the community-approved fixtures." I remember chuckling. "It's just a swing." "No," she said sharply, "it's a violation." That was the day I realized Linda wasn't just an annoying neighbor, she was a dictator in designer loafers. I tried to play nice. I trimmed the grass, I repainted the shed to the dull grey shade listed in their approved colors handbook. I even attended one of their HOA meetings where I was glared at like an outsider. They treated me like a trespasser. on my own land, but that's when I started digging, not just into the rules, but into the deeds. I knew my uncle had owned a lot of property, but I didn't realize just how much until I visited the county records office. Turns out Uncle Tom didn't just own the ranch, he owned the entire original tract of land. That the HOA-controlled community was built on the same HOA that Linda ran, like her personal thief was standing on land. My family still held rights over, but instead of flexing that power right away, I made a quiet decision. I was going to repaint the ranch, not just the house, everything, the barn, the fences, the mailbox, every structure, and I was going to do it in a color that spoke of warmth, freedom, and peace. A golden sandstone blend that made the whole property glow at sunset. Duke and I spent 4 weekends working on it. Neighbors walked by with wide eyes, a few even complimented the change, whispering their approval when Linda wasn't around. I smiled, said, "Thank you," and kept painting. I knew it wouldn't be long before she came. Sure enough, she showed up the day I put the last coat on the barn doors. That's where we began this story. "You didn't get approval, Mr. Miller," she shrieked. I stayed calm. Duke sat next to me, tail wagging ears, perked as if he knew something was coming. Linda pointed again. "This is a community. We have standards. You can't just do whatever you want." I stared at her, amused. "Linda, I didn't need your approval, and why not?" She hissed, stepping closer. "Because I own the HOA lot." Her face went pale, but before she could even form a response, that loud crack shattered the air. We both spun around toward the barn. A heavy wooden beam, freshly painted, had broken loose from the structure and was crashing down. "Duke!" I yelled. The beam was falling fast, right where Duke had been sitting just seconds before, and then boom, the impact shook. The ground dust flew. My heart stopped. "Duke!" I shouted again, running toward the barn. In a panic, I couldn't see him. Linda screamed. Behind me, the neighbors rushed out of their homes. Someone shouted, "Call 911." Everything was chaos. I got to the spot where the beam had landed. It had cracked in half, lying crooked on the ground like a fallen tree limb, and right next to it I saw a paw, but I couldn't tell if he was moving. Everything else faded away. Linda? The shouting, the fines, the power. All I could think about was my best friend buried under the mess. And I was too late, or was I? I dropped to my knees and shoved away the broken pieces of wood, my hands trembling so hard I could barely grip them. My palms scraped against splinters, but I didn't care. All I wanted was to see Duke's face, just a sign, a breath, a blink. "Come on, boy, please," I whispered. "Come on." Suddenly he moved. A soft whimper came from under the beam. Then a tail wagged weakly. I let out a shaky breath as tears filled my eyes. He was alive. "Oh, thank God," I muttered. 2 neighbors, Jake and Heather, ran over and helped me lift the beam, just enough to slide Duke out. His back leg was hurt, but he wasn't bleeding too badly. He nuzzled his nose against my arm, then looked up at me like he was saying, "I'm okay, boss." Heather was already dialing the vet, and Jake offered to drive us there in his truck. As we lifted Duke carefully into the back seat, I looked over my shoulder. Linda stood frozen in place, face white as chalk. She didn't say a word for the first time since I met her. She looked human, shaken, speechless. Maybe she realized what her yelling had led to, or maybe it was just the beginning of something much bigger. Either way, I didn't have time to care. Duke came first. We got him to the vet in under 15 minutes. Dr. Ruiz, a kind, older man who had seen Duke before for vaccinations, ran out to meet us. He examined Duke quickly and nodded. "He's lucky, just a bruised hip and a small cut on the paw. I'll bandage him up and give him something for..." The pain, he'll be back to chasing squirrels in no time. The relief that washed over me nearly knocked me off my feet while we waited. Jake sat next to me and said quietly, "You know Linda's going to make this about the paint job. Somehow she'll twist it." I nodded, "Let her try. But are you serious? You really own the HOA land, every inch of it?" I replied. I didn't tell anyone because I wanted to see how far she'd go, but now she's pushed too far. Jake chuckled. "Man, if this were a movie, I'd say it's about." To get real good, he was right. That night, I stayed up late with Duke lying beside me, bandaged and dozing peacefully. I opened the dusty boxes of old papers my uncle had left me and reread the deed. It was clear he hadn't just owned the land, he'd established a private trust that retained the rights to the HOA's entire plot, and since he passed it to me, the trust's authority had passed too. In other words, Linda had been running her kingdom on land that I now controlled. I spent the rest of the night drafting a letter, not a threatening one, not even one about revenge, just a simple, formal notice to the Homeowners Association board. This is to notify the board that, as of 2 years ago, ownership and rights to the land under the HOA-controlled area, including all common spaces and governing body jurisdiction, legally transferred to Brandon Miller via the Tom Miller Trust. I would like to request an emergency meeting with the board to discuss the terms of the original covenant and explore a more collaborative path forward for the benefit of the neighborhood. Sincerely, Brandon Miller. The next morning, I printed out 20 copies, one for every board member, one for Linda. I tucked her copy into an envelope and walked it to her door myself. I wanted to see her face when she read it. She opened the door in her bathrobe, lips pursed and eyes still sleepy. "What do you want?" she snapped. I handed her the envelope. "It's time we talk," I said. She snatched it from my hand and slammed the door. 10 minutes later, I heard a screech from her house, so loud it scared the birds off the fence. That was Monday. By Wednesday, whispers were already circulating. My mailbox wasn't just for HOA fines anymore. Neighbors began leaving little notes, some apologizing, some encouraging me to take over, some begging me to dissolve the HOA entirely, but not everyone was thrilled. On Friday afternoon, I returned from the store to find my front gate wide open and 2 of my goats missing. I searched everywhere: my land, the neighbor's pasture, even the side of the highway. Nothing. I reported it to the sheriff, but we both knew it wasn't just a coincidence. The following morning, I woke up to a nasty email from Linda. Subject: urgent. Violations escalating, Mr. Miller. Your property has become a danger to the community. Your animals are loose. Your paint color is unsanctioned. Your presence is disruptive. I will be bringing this up at the emergency board meeting, and trust me, you will regret your little power play. Sincerely, Linda Matthews, President HOA. She was scared. And when people like Linda get scared, they get reckless. But it wasn't me she should have feared. It was the truth that night as I sat on the porch, Duke beside me and a storm rolling in. I got a call. It was Heather Brandon. She whispered, her voice shaky. "You need to come to the town hall." Now, what's going on? I just left the emergency meeting. You're not going to believe what they're planning. My stomach dropped. What is it? But she didn't answer right away. They're trying to vote you out of the community. I paused. What do you mean? They're pushing a special motion. Linda's twisting the charter, claiming you're a danger and no longer meet the community harmony standards, Brandon. They're going to try and force you out. And just like that, boom, lightning cracked across the sky. The storm had arrived, and I wasn't just talking about the weather. Rain poured down in sheets as I pulled my truck out of the driveway and sped toward the town hall. Thunder boomed above me, loud and angry, like the sky itself was protesting what was about to go down. I didn't even bother grabbing an umbrella. I was soaked before I hit the building. Steps inside the HOA emergency meeting was already in full swing. People filled the rows of metal folding chairs. Neighbors I'd seen, mowing lawns, walking dogs, handing out candy on Halloween, all now gathered under the flickering fluorescent lights, and up front, standing behind. The long oak table with a mic in her hand was Linda. She was wearing a red blazer and a smug look on her face, and for the sake of community order, she was saying, as I slipped in through the side door, we must act swiftly. This resident has violated numerous regulations, shown open disrespect for our authority, and most importantly, has created a hostile environment. Several people clapped. Some looked uncomfortable. Heather sat in the back row, giving me a slight shake of the head like, "Don't let them bully you." Linda didn't see me yet. She held up a sheet of paper. I'm submitting a motion to remove Brandon Miller as a community resident per Article 11, Section C, in cases where an individual's continued presence negatively impacts the harmony of the neighborhood. The board reserves the right to initiate removal procedures. Whispers rippled through the crowd. I stepped forward. Is that so? Every head in the room turned. Linda froze. Brandon, she said tightly, this is a closed meeting. Good, I said, because I'm about to open something you've been hiding. I pulled out a flash drive and handed it to the AVT tech sitting at the side of the room. He plugged it into the projector system, and within seconds, the screen behind Linda lit up with scanned documents from the county office the Tom Miller Trust I announced was established in 1987. It includes deed ownership of the entire parcel that makes up this community, including the common lots, parks and HOA administrative land that trust now belongs to me. Gasps. Linda turned red. This is absurd. No, I said calmly. What's absurd is trying to kick someone out of a community they legally own. The room went completely silent. I let the words settle in the air like dust after a demolition. Then I continued, I'm not here to cause chaos. I didn't paint my house to offend you. I didn't break your rules to start a war. I moved here because I wanted peace, but for months I've been harassed, fined, humiliated. You sent letters over paint and porch swings while ignoring what really matters: kindness, respect, community. A few neighbors nodded. One woman wiped her eyes. I'm not the enemy here, I said. I'm your neighbor. Linda slammed her gavel. This meeting is over. No, Linda, I said, stepping forward. This meeting is just beginning. I turned back to the crowd. I'd like to propose a new motion, one that rewrite the outdated charter, allows more homeowner autonomy, and actually reflects what the people in this room want. We all deserve to have a voice, not just the ones who yell the loudest. Heather stood up. I second that motion. Then Jake, me too, one by one. More hands went up, and Linda, she sat down, hard. Her power was slipping and she knew it. But just as I thought we'd reached a turning point, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from a blocked number. You're making enemies. Brandon, hope your ranch doesn't burn down like the last one. I read it twice. Then again, Linda may have been the face of the HOA, but someone else was pulling darker strings. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my living room, while Duke, still sore, rested on the couch. The storm outside had passed, but the air felt thick with tension. That message wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. And suddenly a memory came back to me. My uncle had once mentioned a dispute years ago with a developer who tried to buy up his land. When he refused, the guy made life miserable: fake fines, legal battles, and something else. A barn fire. Uncle Tom said it was an accident. But what if it wasn't? What if history was repeating itself? The next morning I drove to the county archives. The clerk was helpful, a young woman named Tina who looked surprised when I asked for any records tied to a developer named Raymond Keyes. She typed for a while, then frowned. "There's not much," she said. "But there is one red-flagged file." She handed it to me. It was old but detailed, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There was a contract proposal signed by Keyes in 1992, an offer to buy the entire tract of land from Uncle Tom for a fraction of its value. Tom had refused. After that came violations lawsuits, and one notation that chilled me: filed fire report, cause undetermined, suspected arson. The same kind of fire I'd nearly had last week with that broken barn beam, the same kind of accident that had nearly crushed Duke, and now a text warning me it could happen again. This wasn't just about paint colors anymore. Someone wanted the land back badly, and they were willing to destroy everything I had to get it. That night, I doubled the locks on the barn doors, installed cameras, called the sheriff's office, and gave them a copy of the text. They promised to look into it, but I could tell this wasn't going to be an easy fight. I had walked into a quiet town looking for peace. Instead, I'd uncovered a power struggle decades in the making, and it was about to explode. The next morning, I woke up to a loud banging at my door. Duke barked. I opened it to find Heather pale and shaking. "Brandon," she whispered, "you need to come now." I followed her to the community board where HOA notices were posted, and stapled right in the center was a new announcement, effective immediately: emergency vote to dissolve HOA hosted at Community Hall, 7 p.m. tonight. My heart pounded. They were going to try and erase the entire HOA before I could take control. But that wasn't what scared me. What scared me was the final line at the bottom of the notice: sponsored by Rise Development Group. Raymond Keyes was back, and this time he wasn't hiding in the shadows. I stood frozen in front of the notice rain from last night, still clinging to the corners of the paper. My breath caught in my throat as I read that name again. Rise Development Group, like it was something out of a ghost story. Heather looked up at me, her eyes wide with worry. "What does that mean?" she asked quietly. "It means," I said, barely managing to keep my voice steady, "they're not trying to remove the HOA president anymore. They're trying to remove me by removing the entire HOA itself." "But I thought that's what you wanted," she whispered. "Didn't you say you wanted to change the HOA?" "Yes," I replied, "but not like this. If the HOA dissolves without a proper transfer of land rights, the community reverts to county control. And that opens the door for Keyes to come in and do exactly what he failed to do 30 years ago." She blinked. "Buy everything up. Worse," I said, "demolish, rebuild, gentrify, bulldoze what makes this place special, and replace it with overpriced, sterile units no one here can afford." Heather's mouth tightened. "That's not going to happen." "I won't let it," I said. "But I need proof. I need to show the community that this isn't about paint or goats or porch swings. It's about legacy." That afternoon, I dove deep into my uncle's old files. I found water-damaged letters, hand-drawn boundary maps, and a series of notarized memos between Tom and Keyes, lawyers. Most were aggressive, some even threatening. But what caught my eye was a photocopy of a signed letter. It read, "To whom it may concern, I, Thomas E. Miller, do hereby reject the final offer made by Raymond Keyes for the land designated as parcel 88B. I will never allow this land to be paved over by greed. This community deserves to be protected. Let the records show this land is not for sale, not now, not ever. Thomas E. Miller." June 5th, 1993. The signature was strong, bold, clear. It gave me chills. I knew what I had to do. I drove to the sheriff's office and gave Deputy Morgan copies of the memos, including the threatening text I received. "We've had our eye on Keyes for years," he said grimly. "If you're right, and he's trying to worm his way back in through legal channels, it's going to get ugly. Can you—"
"Stop the meeting tonight," I asked. "Only if there is immediate proof of fraud or danger," he said. "Otherwise it's private."
"Property business, you'll need to make your case in that hall." With those people I left, feeling like the weight of the whole town had landed on my shoulders by 6:30 p.m. The community hall parking lot was full. Pickup trucks, minivans, even golf carts, all jammed together under the setting sun. People lined up outside, some in lawn chairs, some holding umbrellas just in case the storm decided to come back. Inside, the mood was thick with tension. Linda was already seated at the long table, flanked by a man in a navy suit I didn't recognize. His smile was cold. His eyes scanned the room like he was already measuring it for demolition that had to be Keyes. He took the microphone and smiled. "Good evening, friends. I'm Raymond Keyes, and I'm here to offer you an opportunity, a future without rules, without fines, without boards, breathing down your neck, a future of independence." People murmured. "Dissolving the HOA will release you from all these petty restrictions, and with that freedom comes new
Development, modern infrastructure, better roads, higher property values. This could be the change that you've all been waiting for." He was good, slick, charming. But I knew the truth, and it was time to speak it. I raised my hand. "Mr. Keyes," I said, stepping
forward. "Why don't you tell everyone what happened 30 years ago when my uncle refused your offer?" He didn't flinch. Ancient history sometimes change, do they? I held up the signed letter, because this says otherwise, and so does the land deed. I walked to the front, turning to face the crowd. "My name is Brandon Miller. You all know me as the guy with the goats and the swing and the ugly paint, right?" A few people chuckled, but what you don't know is that my Uncle Tom built this community from the ground up. Literally, he fought to keep it small, peaceful, and fair. I held up the papers. This man I pointed to, Keyes, tried to buy him out, and when Tom said no, he got threats, fires, legal headaches. Now he's back using loopholes to convince you to do what he couldn't do himself. Hand over the future of this neighborhood. Keyes stood. "That's a wild accusation." "No," I said, "it's the truth, and I've got signed documents, county records, and a whole list of violations committed by your development."
"Company in towns just like ours." I paused, letting the silence work in my favor. Ask yourselves, why would someone like him care about a bunch of goats and paint colors? He doesn't. He only cares about the land. Our land. The room buzzed with unease.
Murmurs turned into whispers. Whispers turned into full-blown conversations. Linda tried to speak, but someone from the back stood and shouted, "We deserve a vote." Then another, "Yeah, but not his vote." And another, "I say we vote to remove Keyes, not the HOA." Everything spiraled. Suddenly a loud pop echoed through the hall. The microphone shorted, lights flickered, then smoke. People screamed. The back exit door burst open and a fire alarm wailed. Someone yelled, "Fire behind the building!" Panic swept through the crowd. I turned to the exit, heart racing, and saw it. The storage shed behind the hall engulfed in flames. Linda screamed. People poured outside, and just as I reached the door, I saw him, Keyes, slipping out the side exit phone, in hand, disappearing into the shadows. I pushed past the crowd, sprinting after him, but he was gone, vanished into the smoke, and dark sirens wailed in the distance. The fire truck would be there soon, but the message was clear. This wasn't a debate. Anymore, it was war. The fire was extinguished just after midnight. Thankfully, no one was hurt. The shed behind the town hall was reduced to ashes, and a few nearby trees were scorched black. but the main building had been saved. Still the panic had done its damage. People left, shaken. The emergency vote was postponed until further notice, and the crowd scattered without any real resolution. I stayed behind to help the firefighters and Deputy Morgan review the damage. No electrical wiring in
"That shed," Morgan said, kicking at the charred ground with his boot. "And it hadn't been used in over a year. You ask me this wasn't accidental? Do you think it was keys?" I asked. Morgan sighed. "No way to prove it. Not unless someone saw something, or he
slips up." I clenched my fists. He's trying to scare everyone, stir chaos, make the community too rattled to resist him. "Seems that way," Morgan agreed. "You'd better be careful if he feels like he's losing control. He might get desperate." I nodded, but I'd already made up my mind. The next morning, I started knocking on doors. Jake was the first to answer. He was still in his pajamas, holding a cup of coffee and rubbing his eyes. "You're up early." "I need help," I said. He nodded immediately. "What do you need?" "People," I replied, "and truth." By noon, I had gathered a team: Jake, Heather, old Miss Carla, who had lived on the street for 40 years, and 2 younger couples who'd just moved in. Last year, we set up folding chairs in my barn, taped a giant piece of butcher paper to the wall, and started writing everything we knew about keys, land offers, threats, shady business moves in other towns. "This isn't just about saving the HOA," I told
them. "It's about saving the soul of this neighborhood. If Keys wins everything, changes our homes, our history, everything." Jake looked around. "So what's the plan?" I took a deep breath. "We take it public that night. We printed flyers. Know who's really
behind the vote. Don't let our community be sold off. Ask yourself who benefits. If the HOA is gone, we walked door to door, handed them out at the grocery store, stuck them in mailboxes and taped them to street poles. People started talking again, but this time not about my paint color or Duke's barking. They were talking about keys, and they were angry. Still, we needed something more than anger. We needed a way to stop the next vote. That's when Heather had an idea. "What if we held our own meeting?" she said. "Before the next official vote, a town hall, one where everyone speaks freely, not just the board." Jake leaned forward. "You think people will come after that fire?" she said. "You bet they will." We set the date for Saturday evening and held it at Miss Carla's farm, just outside the HOA's jurisdiction. No bylaws, no interference, just neighbors gathering on hay bales under string lights with free lemonade and truth. I stood in front of them all, heart-pounding. I'd faced down software CEOs,
laid off dozens, built tech systems for billion-dollar companies, but nothing felt more important than this. 30 years ago, my uncle protected this land from being swallowed up by greed, I said. And now it's happening again. If we let Keys win this place,
"Won't be ours anymore, it'll be his." I showed them the letters, the photos, the land deed. People asked questions, real ones, hard ones, and I answered every single one, because the truth didn't need to be sugar-coated. By the end of the night, people weren't just clapping. They were volunteering to canvass the neighborhood, to write letters to the county council, to petition the sheriff for more patrols. The fire had shaken them, but the truth had woken them. Linda, on the other hand, had vanished. No one had seen her since the night of the fire. Even her mailbox overflowed with unopened letters. I couldn't help but feel conflicted. She had been awful to me, but I wasn't sure she had ever truly understood what Keys was doing. Maybe she thought she was protecting the neighborhood all along. Maybe she was just scared. Still, the fight wasn't over. The next morning, Heather called me in a panic. "Brandon," she gasped, "you need to see this." She sent me a photo she'd taken outside the community office. A new sign had gone up overnight: "Future site of Kay's Plaza, luxury townhomes coming soon." I dropped my phone. Duke barked, sensing my distress. I raced to the community lot. There it was, huge, obnoxious, bolted to 2 wooden stakes with a glossy render.
Of modern chrome buildings, Keyes wasn't waiting for the vote. He was moving ahead fast. I called Deputy Morgan. How is he building without approval? I demanded Morgan's side. Technically, if the HOA votes to dissolve and there's no counter-motion on the
Books, the land becomes open to private bids under county zoning law. If he's filed intent documents, it's a grey area. That sign isn't legal, I growled. He can't just claim land he doesn't own. Morgan lowered his voice. He's got lawyers, lots of them. That evening, I stood on my porch, watching the sun sink below the hills. Duke lay beside me, tail thumping lazily. I was angry, tired, but not defeated. A truck pulled into my driveway. It was Linda. She got out slowly, wearing jeans and an old hoodie. No makeup, no clipboard, just Linda. She looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, "I didn't know." I said, "Nothing." She stepped forward. I didn't know he'd go this far. I thought he just wanted to clean up the community, fix some fences, replace a few roofs. I thought I was helping you find me over a porch swing. I said evenly. "I know," she whispered. I was wrong. We stood in silence for a while, then she reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder. I kept everything she said. Every document, every email, even the cash off her keys, made me to push the vote faster. My eyes widened. "He paid you?" She nodded, ashamed. "He said it was a donation. I didn't ask questions. I wanted to believe I was doing the right thing." I opened the folder. It was a gold mine proof of manipulation, bribes, contracts with Keyes's signature, and
Linda's initials. Some weren't even properly dated, this I said, breathless. "This can stop everything." She looked at me. "Then do it. Stop him." Before I could thank her, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, checked the screen, and went pale. I think.
"He knows I came here." A black SUV cruised slowly past my house, not fast, not loud, just enough to be seen. Duke barked again, this time low and uneasy. Linda backed up. "You need to be careful," she said quickly. "He's not just greedy, Brandon, he's dangerous." I nodded. The SUV disappeared over the hill. Linda got in her car and drove away, tires crunching gravel as she vanished into the dark. I stood alone again, fold her in my hand, but this time I wasn't afraid, because now I had everything, and he had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I drove straight to the county clerk's office with the folder Linda gave me, tucked under my arm like it held the keys to the universe, because in a way it did. The clerk, a woman named Janine, who had seen me there far too many times in the past month, raised an eyebrow as I dropped the folder on her desk. "What is it this time, Brandon?" "Proof," I said. "Enough to stop Keyes." She opened it, eyes scanning the first few pages. Her mouth twitched into a frown. "Wait, is this Linda's signature?" "Yep, and that right there." I pointed to a scanned document with the words "consultancy agreement" at the top. "Is an under-the-table payment. Dressed up as consulting, she admits it, all of it. The local radio station even agreed to announce it the night before I sat down and wrote out everything I wanted to say. No speeches, no legal mumbo-jumbo, just the story, honest, raw." I folded the paper and stuck it in my jacket pocket. Saturday arrived, sunny and warm, almost too perfect. Jake set up the mic and speakers on the flatbed of his truck. Heather handed out water bottles. Miss Carla brought cookies, like it was a church picnic instead of a battle for their homes. And when I stepped up to speak, people cheered, dozens of them, maybe more. I took the mic and glanced around. "My name's Brandon Miller. I began some of, me as the guy who painted his ranch without permission. Some of you know me as the guy who kept goats. But what you all need to know today is who's really been pulling the strings behind the scenes. I unfolded the letter, read the timeline, the bribes, the threats, the photo, and finally I held up a copy of my uncle's. Deed, this land belongs to the people who built it, who love it, who live here. And if you let Keys and his kind take over, you lose more than a house. You lose a community. Thunderous applause, even the news crew looked moved, just as I stepped down. From the flatbed, a sleek black SUV turned the corner. It was him, Keys. He pulled up. Slow got out smooth as ever, wearing a charcoal suit and dark sunglasses, and without saying a word, he walked straight up to me through the crowd and smiled. Nice
Speech, he said. You got guts.
Save it, I replied. He leaned in his voice low enough so only I could hear, You think you've won, this isn't over, you can't stop what's coming. I stared him down. I already have. He chuckled, turned to walk away. Then a sheriff's cruiser cut. Across the parking lot, Deputy Morgan stepped out. He held a folded paper in his hand and walked straight to Keys. Raymond Keys, he said, you're under investigation for fraudulent development activity, bribery, and criminal intimidation. Gasps filled the air. I blinked. I hadn't expected that. Morgan continued. We're placing a hold on all development tied to Keys' development group until this is sorted out. Sir, you need to come with us. Keys smirked, but didn't fight. He raised his hands and shrugged. I always did like small towns, he said, with a smirk. Too bad they never last. As they put him in the cruiser, I felt something shift. Not just relief justice, real solid, satisfying justice. But I should have known that wasn't the end, because that night as I walked Duke around the back pasture, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a blocked call. I picked it up cautiously. A deep voice on the line said, You stopped Keys. But he wasn't working alone. Click, the line went dead. And just like that, the next chapter began. I stood in the pasture. The weight of those 6 words pressing into my chest like a stone. He wasn't working alone. The wind rustled through the tall grass. Duke tilted his head, sensing the shift in my energy. My fingers tightened around the leash as I stared at the darkening horizon, wondering who else had been quietly pulling strings behind the scenes. I returned to the house in silence. Duke stayed close, his paws soft against the wood floor. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, lit only by the soft glow of the porch light filtering through the window. My phone sat, face up, silent, like it was waiting to betray me again. Who else could it be? I had already confronted Linda. She had folded, and she'd handed me everything that folder. It had been a time bomb, yes, but a necessary one. So who or not came at the door. 3 sharp raps. No hesitation. I stood slowly, every muscle in my body. Tight. Duke stood too, not barking, just watching. When I opened the door, a man stood on the porch, late 50s, heavy set, wearing a faded green flannel and jeans tucked into mud-covered boots. I'm Carl Bennett, he said calmly, Vice President of the HOA board. I remembered him vaguely, always quiet in meetings, never voting out loud, always sat in the second chair from the left. He handed me a letter. What's this? I asked. He looked me straight in the eye. It's a confession. I opened the envelope. Inside was a typed document, signed and dated. It detailed how Keys had approached him and a few other board members, offering bonuses if they helped him push a redevelopment plan disguised as a modernization initiative. We were supposed to vote Linda out. Quietly, Carl said then use the community vote to disband the HOA, making it look like a group decision. Keys promised us kickbacks on every new home sold. I stared at him, heart hammering. Why are you telling me this now? He looked at the porch floor. Because I didn't sign up for fire or threats or following you home. I thought we were just going to update roads, make some money. but the things he said did. I knew it had gone too far. You followed me. He winced. Not me, some of the others they had. Pictures of your place, your dog, sent them to Keys as leverage. I didn't know until after, but I didn't stop it either. I didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, I asked how many others. 4 board members. He said maybe 5, I'm not even sure. If they all knew the full plan, but I'll testify. I'll say everything. I'll give you the emails. I took the letter and stepped back. Then do it before this thing poisons anyone else. He nodded and turned to leave as he reached the end of the porch. He stopped and looked over his shoulder. I'm sorry, Brandon, for everything I didn't answer. I just closed the door that night. I didn't sleep again. Instead, I made copies of Carl's letter and emailed them to Deputy Morgan, the county DA, and even the local paper. The puzzle pieces were falling into place and the picture was clearer than ever. Keys had never planned to win by vote. He planned to divide and buy out, quietly, legally, and under everyone's noses. But now his network was unraveling. The next week moved fast. The sheriff's office raided 2 board members' homes. One had shredded files, another had deleted their emails too late. The county's digital forensics team recovered everything. The public backlash was immediate and fierce protests formed outside the community office. Cars honked in support as they passed handmade signs that read, "Our homes aren't for sale, protect our ranch." Brandon was right. And then something incredible happened. Neighbors, people who'd once avoided me, ignored me, even whispered behind my back, started showing up with brushes, paint, and tools. Jake arrived with a bucket of whitewash and said, "Thought your fence could use some backup." Heather brought tomato seedlings for the garden I'd left half dug. Even Linda, who had gone nearly silent since that night on my porch, showed up with a tray of cookies and an offer. I know the bylaws better than anyone. If you're serious about forming a real HOA that serves the people I'll help. I took her up on it because the truth is, I didn't want to destroy the HOA. I wanted to rebuild it fairly, openly. Together, 2 months later, the community voted unanimously to remove all board members who had collaborated with Keys. A temporary committee was formed, including Miss Carla, Jake, Heather, and even 2 teenagers who had lived in the neighborhood their entire lives. We rewrote the charter, added protections for land ownership, banned any large-scale redevelopment without a 90% homeowner approval. And yes, we updated the paint color list to include sunset sandstone. We renamed the new charter after my uncle, the Tom Miller Covenant. It passed with tears and standing ovations on the night of the vote. I walked back to the same porch where everything had begun. Duke sat beside me. The moon rose over the pasture, soft and full, and for the first time in a long time, everything was quiet. I picked up my phone and snapped a photo of
the ranch bathed in that golden light. Then I posted it to the neighborhood group with one sentence: "This is what home looks like when we protect it together." And just when I thought the story had finally ended, my phone buzzed one more time. This time it wasn't a threat, it was an email from Linda Matthews Civic.
Subject, urgent, HOA inquiry. Another town needs help. Message Brandon. A town 2 counties over is dealing with something that looks awfully familiar. A developer, a corrupt HOA people scared. They asked if we could come talk. I think you should go. I smiled. Duke wagged his tail. Looks like peace wasn't going to last long. But maybe that was okay, because sometimes peace isn't just something you find, it's something you fight for.